Well, Republicans on the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, led by Congressman Brad Wenstrup, saying that the Biden administration may have tried to cut corners on the FDA's COVID vaccine approval process. In a letter to FDA Commissioner Robert Califf, lawmakers write, quote, "The effort may not have been to save lives, but concernedly to provide cover for implementing and enforcing vaccine mandates across the country." Joining me right now is the Ohio Congressman himself in charge of the committee, Brad Wenstrup, the Coronavirus Pandemic Select Subcommittee Chairman and a member of the House Ways and Means and Intelligence Committees as well. Congressman, thanks very much for being here this morning.
Sure.
I've got your letter here. Tell us what you think happened here. I know that in order to mandate that everybody get vaccinated, you had to contend that there was no available medicine on the market for COVID-19. And that's why we saw all the hysteria over hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin. These drugs were off limits to most people because you had to get the vaccine. You were mandated. Tell me what happened.
Well, first of all, not only were those drugs off limits in many ways, doctors that were prescribing them, these are FDA-approved drugs, and your goal is to do no harm but to try and help people, they got threats. They got threats of losing their license. But framing the whole thing, you know, the vaccines were approved for emergency use only at first, and they were prioritized for the most vulnerable. And to me, that made some sense. But Pfizer submitted for full FDA approval in May of 21. And then FDA did approve expediting their review in July. And publicly, they were saying that means we'll have it ready by January of 22. Privately, they said maybe we can get it done by September of 21. But they also warned that this would decrease public confidence in the vaccines. It may be a less thorough examination. But they pointed out that absence of this licensing, you could not issue a mandate. Well, suddenly in August, it's granted. And next day, the DOD puts out the mandate. You know, it's interesting, Maria, I sent a letter to DOD long before that saying, I don't think you should issue a mandate for this until it's fully approved. Well, lo and behold, it gets moved up to August. And the next day, DOD puts out the mandate, followed by OSHA doing a mandate for vaccinations and testing, and CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, puts out a mandate for the vaccine. I mean, you can't make this up, and this is extremely dangerous for our entire system and for the American people, obviously.
Well, tell me why it's as dangerous as you say. A couple of quotes that stand out from the emails that you were able to get in discovery. Public confidence in COVID-19 vaccines would not be served by rushing our review. Or how about this one? Absence a license, states cannot require mandatory vaccination. Or this, a review that is hyper-accelerated beyond the already very rapid September 15th target date, and as a consequence, may be less thorough than our typical review, seems more likely to undermine confidence in the vaccine. It was all about making sure people felt they needed that vaccine.
Yeah, but the public confidence actually went down with that, as they stated that it would, because it was rushed. And you don't have time to see more fully what kind of side effects may be coming from the vaccine. Who really needs the vaccine? You know, this vaccine is different than your measles, mumps, rubella, polio, those types of vaccines. This vaccine is more of a treatment, and we don't know everything about it, and that's why the FDA was hesitant. But also, when it comes to public health, you need to have the public confidence. And so what they were warning about absolutely did happen, and that's why there was such an uproar about the mandates to begin with. And it certainly looks like the narrative was, get this mandate out there, act like this is the only way you can be saved from COVID, and that isn't necessarily true. And the whole origins of COVID is what we've been investigating as well, as you know.
Well, let's talk about that, because Dr. Fauci is dismissing growing calls for accountability over his role in the coronavirus pandemic. Watch this.
There's no response to that craziness, Jim. I mean, prosecute me for what? What are they talking about? I mean, I wish I could figure out what the heck they were talking about. I think they're just going off the deep end.
And of course, Congressman Fauci is responding to this December tweet from Elon Musk, who said, quote, "My pronouns are prosecute Fauci." Congressman, what went on here in terms of the cover-up?
Well, you got Dr. Fauci, who claims that he is the science. And when it comes to this, first of all, he's not a virologist. And let me keep that in mind. So the evidence has shown us that Christian Anderson emails Dr. Fauci in January of 20 and says, this thing looks engineered. Then Dr. Fauci gets some people together to talk about this. And a week later, they're saying it came from nature. And one of the things Dr. Fauci put out right away is the published article from 2015 about China creating a chimera or doing gain-of-function research with Ralph Barrett from North Carolina, by the way. So they say that this together was prompted by Dr. Fauci and that it was there to disprove the lab leak theory. And why would they be out to disprove that rather than just discussing it? So they get this article named Proximal Origins. They get it printed in Nature Medicine. And Dr. Anderson said his focus was to disprove the lab leak theory. But they excluded Dr. Redfield, who actually is a virologist, and he is the CDC director. And he says that he was excluded because they said they wanted to have a single narrative that we couldn't even talk about a lab leak theory. Well, Dr. Redfield had great testimony this week where he talks about this being the most infectious virus of our time. And certainly we have the information about the Wuhan Institute of Virology seeking grants from the United States to put a furin cleavage site on a coronavirus, which is what makes it more infectious to humans. And we see a lot of nefarious things going on in China, or curious things going on in China when all this breaks out. We see that there were some lab workers, researchers that became ill in 19, and also in 19 they deleted their library of sequences of coronaviruses. They changed the Wuhan Institute from a civilian measure to a military institution, and they also put in a new ventilation system. So there's just so many things. And Dr. Fauci's trying to claim that somebody in nature got this and then took it to the lab. That's his most recent as of yesterday.
Well, he didn't want to be exposed for actually sending funding to EcoHealth Alliance, which sent the money to Wuhan, which did gain-of-function research, which ultimately was the site of the lab leak. But look, I mean, we're looking at all of this. They lied again. I mean, this is why that weaponization committee is also so important, because you had all agencies all on board misleading the American people, talking with social media to cancel anybody who had the nerve to mention any drug like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, or had the nerve to say that it was a lab leak. I mean, this is just stunning. Congressman, I've got to get your take on the other stunning issue that we're watching this morning, and that is the failure of Silicon Valley Bank. And, of course, this upcoming budget, which I've spoken with a number of Republicans, even some Democrats are pushing against this president's budget. But look at SVB Financial Group this morning. Of course, this has been shut down, and now the regulators are saying that they will back all deposits, not just from Silicon Valley Bank, but also Signature Bank. Your reaction, put your House Ways and Means hat on right now and tell us what this means for the economic backdrop.
Well, it certainly is frightening to the average American who's watching this happen, for sure. And I'll be curious to see what the president has to say. I think he's going to speak later this morning. There have just been a series of things that move us in the wrong direction, and especially since the Biden administration came into power. It seems it's one thing after another, unfortunately. So what he has to say is going to be important. But keeping this in mind, too, the president's budget sets his priorities, but it certainly is not law, and it's nothing that we have to adhere to. So there is a tremendous responsibility on us as the majority in the House to call out what is actually taking place and what is better for America as we move forward.
Yeah, well, it's a $6.8 trillion budget with trillions involved in that of higher taxes at a time that the economy is clearly weakening. Congressman, thanks very much. We'll be watching your work. Brad Wenstrup joining us this morning. Thank you, sir.